All right, so we left off talking about different plant structures and the way that those structures are organized. We talked about the roots and the stems and the leaves and the monocots and the dicots. Well, today we're going to talk about transport. So we introduced the notion of xylem and phloem back in chapter 21. So remember, xylem is used to transport water up and down the plant. So the xylem is going to be multi-directional, bidirectional. It's going to go from the roots to the top, and then from the top all the way down to the roots. So the water's going up and it's going down in the xylem. Now the phloem, on the other hand, that's going to be unidirectional, and that's going to flow from the leaves, which is where photosynthesis is happening, so where all the sugars are. It's going to flow from the leaves downward throughout the rest of the plant. And so today we're going to talk about those two mechanisms and how it actually works. And so before that, we're going to kind of introduce some more information about plants in general. Plants require a lot of the same nutrients that humans do. This is going to include, calcium, potassium, magnesium, but there are several different macronutrients which are required in larger levels. And so those macronutrients are going to include carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which is what most organisms are made up of. So lots of carbon, lots of hydrogen, lots of oxygen. All those combined make up about 95% of the plant. And then you're going to have other necessary macronutrients such as nitrogen, potassium, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and sulfur. In particular, the nitrogen and the phosphorus, there are nitrogen cycles and phosphorus cycles that occur within the plant. So this phosphorus and this nitrogen, they're absolutely essential for normal plant growth. And then in addition to these macronutrients that plants need, there's also something called micronutrients. And these micronutrients are just nutrients you need, but in a very, very small amount, kind of like trace elements that we talked about. And so these micronutrients are usually going to be found within these fertilizers and stuff that you use to grow your plants. And so those fertilizer contains a lot of these nutrients, which helps keep your plant healthy and alive and fed well. Now, when we're talking about plants, we usually talk about what's above ground. Well, here we're looking at the different layers of soils. And so depending on how old a piece of land is, it's going to have several different layers. That first layer, the stuff that we walk on, the top ground, is called the litter. Now the litter is going to consist of all the vegetation and all the dead leaves. It's basically like all the organic decaying material. So like leaves that have fallen from trees, nuts that have fallen. It's all the organic matter that's just kind of sitting on the top. And a lot of the time these plants, because that organic matter will eventually decay and seep into the soil, and so the plants can absorb the nutrients from the litter once it gets reabsorbed back into the ground. Now, the topsoil is going to be the layer immediately below all of this organic debris. And it's the topsoil where you see a lot of these roots coming in. And so most of the nutrients will actually be absorbed in this topsoil region right here, simply because that's the region where most of the roots are. And remember, the roots absorb nutrients based on surface area. And so most of the surface area of the roots are in this topsoil. And so another term used to describe topsoil is called horizon A. Don't ask me why. It's just make sure you know it's called horizon A. Below horizon A, you have a thicker layer that is going to be made up of lots of minerals and lots of clay. So if you've ever been digging, to put in sprinkler systems or something like that, and you hit that hard clay, that's what we're talking about. That's going to be the B horizon. Not many roots reach down into this area. They can, but it's going to be a little bit harder to observe water and nutrients from this area because it's older, so it's compacted really, really tightly. And then below the horizon B, you have this horizon C. And this horizon C is even going to be older than everything above it. And so it's going to be made up of dense rock that's been weathered over the ages, over the years. And then finally below that, the hardest material, that's going to be your bedrock. We rarely reach through the bedrock when we're talking about plants. In fact, they usually don't reach through to the bedrock. They usually only go about as far as horizon B. So this is just to introduce you to the different layers that are involved in plant life, but the ones that are going to be most relevant to growing living plants are going to be the topsoil and the litter. Questions? Okay, so we've already kind of introduced the idea that plants require several different nutrients. And we already mentioned that one of those nutrients that plants need a lot of is nitrogen. And so nitrogen is going to be found a lot in the air, so about 78%, and oxygen's about 21%. And then the other 1% is, other random substances. But there's lots of nitrogen in the air. And these plants require nitrogen in order to survive. But what happens is the plants themselves are not going to be capable of absorbing nitrogen directly into their cells. Remember, we have the stomatas that are on the leaves. That's where this gas exchange occurs. This is where carbon dioxide goes in, gets converted into sugar, and then oxygen gets released. Well, the roots are also capable of absorbing other things besides water, such as nitrate and ammonium, which is right here. But like we said, these plants, they can't take in the nitrogen gas by themselves. So what happens, they have these little nodules, these little buds on the roots that have a type of bacteria in them. And what those bacteria do, their job is to convert nitrogen gas that's found in the soil, and it's going to convert it into either this nitrate or this ammonium. Now, nitrate and ammonium, these can directly feed into the plant cell and be their source of nitrogen. So there's a symbiotic relationship between the bacteria that are living on the roots of plants and the plant itself. The bacteria is there to help convert or nitrify. They're called nitrifying bacteria. And those nitrifying bacteria, what they do is they take nitrogen gas and they convert it into nitrate and ammonia, which are two forms of nitrogen that the plants can take up directly. And then we also have, we said most of the plant is made up of the carbon and the hydrogen and the oxygen. The places where most of that is going to be absorbed into the plant is going to be on the leaves through those stomata. So again, it's taking in carbon dioxide to use for photosynthesis, and then once that sugar gets produced, oxygen is going to be a byproduct, so that oxygen will then leave through the stomata. And so when we're talking about these nitrifying bacteria, you can see we have a little pea pod plant over here. You can see all these little, they're called nodules. They're like just little hard balls. And within those are these nitrifying bacteria. So here you can see kind of a blown up schematic of the nodule. And so within that nodule, you'll have all these bacteria. These are the denitrifying or the nitrifying bacteria. And so they're going to absorb this nitrogen gas, and then they're going to convert it either into ammonia or into nitrate. And again, that's forms of nitrogen that plants are able to use. In addition to the nitrifying bacteria in the nodules, we also have some nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the root hairs. Remember, we have roots, and then coming off those roots, we have teeny tiny little root hairs to help increase the surface area. Well, those root hairs also contain these bacteria, and which are also going to be able to take in nitrogen and convert it to either nitrate or ammonia. Yeah?
Can you go over the function of the root nodules again?
Yeah, so the nodule, what it is, it's a buildup of bacteria, and it creates this hard little shell. And those bacteria are protected within those shells. And the reason why the plant doesn't mind is because the bacteria is actually helping out the plant. And so the bacteria, what it's doing, it's taking nitrogen gas from the soil, and it's converting it into a different form of nitrogen that the plant can use. Because the plant can't do anything with nitrogen gas. It can't bring it in through its stomata, it can't use it for anything, so it has to be converted into a form that the plants can use. And this nitrate and ammonium are going to be forms that the plant can use directly. And so the way we get that is through these bacteria that are found within these nodules and within these root hairs. So just like the plant is benefiting from the bacteria is also benefiting from the plant. The plant's making its own sugars and transporting them to the roots, so you know the bacteria are going to have some of those sugars. They're also going to have a lot of the other nutrients and water and stuff that are circling around. That's why we call it a symbiotic relationship. Biotic, means life, and sim means kind of beneficial. So you have two organisms living beneficially within one another. The bacteria help the plants by converting nitrogen into a usable form, and the plants help the bacteria by providing it with water and nutrients and sugar from photosynthesis. Questions? Okay. All right, so here we're kind of introducing the concept of transport again within plant cells. Here you can see the different arrangement of the xylem and the phloem in this plant. So within the stem, in this particular plant, you're going to have the xylem and the phloem ordered around the outside edge, so that's going to make this a dicot, right? And in the stem, you see this is kind of that star-shaped pattern that we were talking about, or sorry, not in the stem, but in the roots. And so based on this pattern of xylem and phloem in the roots, and also in the stem, you should be able to tell that this is going to be a dicot. So dicots are going to have these patterns of xylem and phloem within the plants. That being said, so remember we said that xylem flow, so water flow is always going to start at the roots. It's going to be absorbed into the roots, and it's going to initially travel upward to all parts of the plant. And also that water is going to be able to flow downward again. And then the phloem, which is responsible for carrying sugars and the products of photosynthesis, that's going to be going from these sources, or what are these leaves, because the leaves are going to be the organs of photosynthesis, right? Leaves are the only part of the plant that photosynthesize. The roots don't photosynthesize, the stems don't photosynthesize. It's just the leaves. So all this sugar that we've been making in photosynthesis is stored in the leaves. And so the way that we get that sugar to the other parts of the plant is through this phloem. And so the phloem is always starting at the leaves, at the top, and are being forced down throughout the stem, throughout the rest of the plant. So we've got water that's being transported by this xylem, and then we've got these products of photosynthesis, all these sugars and stuff, that are being pushed downwards to the rest of the plant from the leaves. And then at the same time, remember we talked about these mesophyll cells right here? These are these top layer of cells. These are the guys that are photosynthesizing. All right, you can see all the, dozen or so chloroplasts within each one of these mesophyll cells. And so as those cells are photosynthesizing, the sugars that they're making are going to be able to jump into the phloem based on the rules of diffusion. So if you have a whole bunch of sugar in here and not a whole bunch right here, it's going to want to travel into the phloem, right? So that's how we get the sugar molecules into the phloem. And then that phloem will push the sugar molecules down to the rest of the plant. We doing okay? All right. All right, so we're going to talk about the different theories that are used to describe both xylem transport and phloem transport. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is xylem transport, the movement of water. And there's something that's called transpiration, which is directly related to xylem movement of water. So transpiration, what it is you have the sun, right, and it's providing energy for photosynthesis, but at the same time it's hot, right? So it's absorbing a lot of water. It's causing a lot of evaporation of water. And the plant is made up of a lot of water, right? So if you have a plant in the ground and you have water that's being, water's involved in photosynthesis, but if it's really, really hot, then that water at the top of the tree, part closest to the sun, is going to start to evaporate, right? Well, all of these water molecules are going to be contained, or not contained, but basically connected to one another. So if I have a tree, and here's all the roots, all right, here's the sun, right? It's causing this absorption of water upward towards the top. But all of these water molecules, remember we talked about adhesion and cohesion? Cohesion is the ability of water molecules to bind to other water molecules. And then adhesion is the ability of water molecules to bind to something else other than water. Well, we have these water molecules at the top, but due to cohesion, every single water molecule is connected to one another. So imagine a long chain of water molecules starting all the way down from the roots and going all the way up towards the top. So all these water molecules, they're hydrogen bonding with one another due to this cohesion. Also going on, in addition to these water molecules binding to one another, remember they're also interacting with the components of the wood. And so that's an example of adhesion, when you have water bonding to, let's just say, the cellulose in the cell cell walls of plants. So this cohesion and this adhesion is help keeping these water molecules kind of in a Congo line, right? They're just holding on to one another, following one another, right? And so as this water gets absorbed from the top, that's just going to bring everybody else with it. All right, and so what this is again, this is due to the cohesion observed between water molecules. And so this theory is called the cohesion tension theory. And it's basically what we just described. So as water is evaporated, or as transpiration occurs, and by the way, this evaporation of water from plants, that's called transpiration. And so the cohesion tension theory says that as transpiration occurs, so as this water is being evaporated from the plant, more of these water molecules, because they're all attached to each other and attached to the side of the tree or within the tree, they're going to be able to move up as those get evaporated. So again, just picture these water molecules as kind of like a conga line. They're already attached to one another, so if the top ones evaporate and go, that means the next ones are stepping up in their place, and that's pulling everyone else behind them. So as transpiration occurs, water molecules are going to move upward towards the top of the tree due to the fact that they're bonding to one another through cohesion. Does that kind of make sense to everyone? Okay, do I need to explain again? 1, 2, 3, no? Okay. All right, so in this xylem transport, it's this cohesion tension theory that is used to pull these water molecules up. And so make sure you understand how this works. I can see a short answer question saying, describe the cohesion tension theory of xylem transport.
Just the Congo line?
You can put Congo line if you explain it in biological terms. You can use it as an analogy for the water molecules, but don't just put Congo lines. That's not going to work. But anyways, so this movement of water upwards from the roots all the way towards the top of the tree, this is going to take two different routes. Basically, the water can move in between cells. So if we have a whole bunch of cells next to one another, the water will kind of travel and weave its way around the cells. Or the water can travel directly through the cells. And remember, we talked about those plasmodesmata, those little holes on the side of adjacent plants that allow cytoplasm to be connected between cells next to one another. So if they're taking this intracellular route, that water will travel through those plasmodesmata. And it'll keep going to all these adjacent cells through the cytoplasm. Whereas in the extracellular pathway, again, you just have the water kind of bobbing and weaving between the different plant cells. And so here you can see what well, let me back up before I go ahead. Do we need any sort of clarification on anything up here before we move on to phloem? Yeah, Candace? The plasmodesmata. So when we have adjacent plant cells, so here's a plant cell, here's another one, there's another one. They're going to have these little holes in them that are connecting the cytoplasm of each adjacent cell. And that little hole, that's what the plasmodesmata is. Do I not have it up there? Okay, plasmodesmata. And so those plasmodesmata, these little holes in between the plant cells, that's what allows the cytoplasm and water and nutrients and a whole bunch of other stuff just to pass back and forth between cells. So if the water is taking this intracellular route, it's going to enter through these plasmodesmata and then travel through the cells by going through these little pores of these plasmodesmata. Any other questions? Okay. So phloem transport is going to involve movement of sugar molecules from the sites of photosynthesis to the sites where there's nothing being photosynthesized. Oh wait, I'm still on xylem. Sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so back to cohesion tension theory. All right, this is it kind of drawn out for you. And so again, you can see that this transpiration is occurring. Water is being absorbed or evaporated from the treetops. And so as that occurs, again, because all of these water molecules are in a conga line, when some of them move